Right, so that's those bits all taken off. As you say, we can still see the green. I've given a bit of a wipe over just to check. Now, as you say, we've got some pretty hefty filling going on down in here and in these roots down by the gum bays and things like that. So I said, like we did before, we're just going to take some acrylic, normal flat type paint, and all we're going to do is paint these joints. Now, I always do this to all of my joints, no matter if they've been filled or not. There's two very good reasons for it. Firstly, you can see if there's any dodgy joins, because obviously we're going to give it a light sanding over anyway. Secondly, it'll act as a small barrier between your spray painting, because what happens is when you come to paint it with the actual airbrushing especially, you may find that you actually get a sort of a, because it's like a porous effect. When you spray onto it pretty quickly, the paint gets soaked up because the filler is actually reabsorbing water, and it sort of sucks it all up, and then you end up with a pattern, and you can see where your filler is. A couple of coats of acrylic by brush and a sand afterwards will seal that and stop that from happening. So things like under here, this big patch we've got, it makes good sense to make sure this is fully painted over. So all we'll do is carry on. You can probably see in a moment that how it actually works. It will suck up and absorb all the moisture out of the acrylic paint, and make it dry a lot quicker. Also at the same time, I'm just going to pop a bit of paint down in that wing root so we can check it on both sides to make sure we're happy with that, the finish that we've got going on in there. So we just finish off those areas, and I say these bits around the gun bay to see what it's like. And again, we'll do this front leading edge. As I say, it's not a neat job because we're actually going to rub all this off. But if you have got any small little imperfections, the acrylic will bung it all up. It will actually act as a little filler. Now, as you can see on this top edge already, that's completely dry, which is a sign of that the filler is absorbing the paint, the moisture out of the paint. So what we do, we just do around this front of the gun. So there we go, those all areas are all done. Now we want that acrylic paint to totally dry, so we're going to give it either, if you've got a drying bay, ideal, hair dry, just as good. Give it a blow round, completely dry it, then don't sand it straight away, let it stand for an hour, just let that, actually the acrylic cure hard. That way you can sand it without it being rubbed off. Obviously if it's still slightly wet, it sort of peels instead of sands. So we just need to do that. So we're just going to let that dry a moment. Okay, so this is at a nice time to dry. I've just started sanding off the bottom area like this. So if we bring you in just a little bit. So the acrylic has had a nice long time to dry off. It's completely cured, so it'll sand well. Same thing when you're doing any sanding, don't dig in there trying to get it out with heavy duty files. Let it all do its own work. So if you take a medium type of sanding sponge and you just gently rub away, keeping it flat, and let the sponge do all the work, because you don't want to dig out anything in there that you don't want to come out. So by doing it lightly, and as you can see the difference in the colour on this area here. We just bring you in. As you see, you can see some filler then showing through as well as the paint, and we carry on. And then obviously every now and again give it a rub on your trouser like I do, or a towel, just to knock any dust off of the actual sponge itself, and just keep rubbing down until you'll feel it's almost perfectly smooth. You might get a little tiny ridge, but you don't have to worry about that too much, because you can pop a panel line in there, which is a little trick I'll show you in a moment. But basically we're just going to polish this all up, if you like, by sanding in. Then when you've got it to a position where not a lot's happening, same thing, a little bit of moisture, because what that'll do is help clean out the sponge, and it'll give it a little bit more bite to be able to get in there. Now as you can see, you've got the filler showing back now, everything's covered. There's obviously, we've got this in here, we're going to have to get that out. But you can see it's all there, and that join is very smooth. Now as you can see, there's that little pitting effect going on here. This is literally where the glue's melted the plastic slightly and made little dips. So if we just do this area back here as well. Remember, don't push too hard because you don't want to be bending any of the wing down and bits and pieces. But there we go. And obviously we've lost that horrible groove that would be left there, and any nasty joints. So just keep going around the entire model and polish off all these areas where you've actually been doing, and then we can go around to rescribe. So once you've been around it with your quite a coarse sanding sponge, just literally flick to your fine sanding sponge and give it a good rub around everywhere quite vigorously, and that will just take out any little scratches and any sort of last minute joints. Moisten it a little bit just to help it flow round, so acting a little bit like sort of wet and dry, and it'll just take out any last little tiny imperfections. And that squeaky sound is quite a good one because it means it's sort of almost like a polished surface, if you like. So we just pop around those last few areas, and there we go. That's the filling work done now. By obviously feeling it around, you can feel that it's pretty smooth and there's no gaps and things like that. Now obviously if you're a beginner, you might think, right, okay, that's fair enough, and then you can move on to painting and the final assembly, if you like. But from our point of view, we're going to rescribe it. Now for rescribing, the two easiest things to have is what we call a P cutter. This is a Tamiya one, and it's got this sort of hook shape thing going on it, and you just drag it back. And then the other thing you can have is these, which are tri-tools, which are very flexible, thin pieces of aluminium. Obviously these have got different holes in it, you can get different patterns in it, and they're for putting on. But the easiest way to do, you just literally put it on where the panel line is, or where the remainder of the panel line is, and literally all you do is just drag it across, and you just drag it a couple of times very lightly, like so, and you can make a nice new crisp panel line. So if I bring you in again, and all you're going to do is those ones that perhaps we filled up with paint, or we've actually filled in with filler, we can just pop those back in very easily, very straightforward. Just like so. And if we just do these at the front here. There we go. Now when you're scribing, you have to remember to do it when it's completely dry. There's no point trying to do this if the actual model is the glue, there's wet areas or filler, because all it will end up doing is dragging, and you don't want it to drag. And don't forget, at this point you can clean out any areas which are full of filler and filler dust. You can just literally just drag your cutter, your scriber along those areas. So the main thing is, we're doing all your scribing is to take your time. If there's any filler and bits and pieces, just scrape it out over your panel lines, and away you go. So you can just go along, clean out all those little lines, and so any problems where you haven't got a line at all, perhaps you have to start afresh. But usually if you look at the other side, you can see where you were, or where there's a panel line running, and you can just pop a new fresh one in. Okay, so we've now finished. It's all been rescribed. everywhere. Literally we were saying, just working our way right the way around with our cutter. Any little areas like these circles here, you could use a sharp, trying to find one, a sharp cocktail stick type thing. Obviously this one isn't sharp, but it might be enough to get it out, and you can just scoop out any nasties inside little round objects and things. If you haven't got one, you can actually buy scribers with just a point. You could use a needle in a pin vise, little things like that for just rescribing circles and complex shapes, because obviously the pea cutter, this one here, likes to do lines and swerves, but it doesn't like to do circles. So anyway, our next thing now is basically the final assembly. So we can put the tail on, but we won't put the two tails on the sides on at the moment, purely because they're going to be slightly easy to knock off, and obviously for the painting point of view it'd be easier to do like that. So we have our tail. It's quite a nice fit on there anyway. So all we're going to do is make sure we're happy with the fit, the way it goes, which it is. Then we take our usual thin glue, a touch, both sides, let the capillary action work, and we're just going to hold it in the vertical for a few seconds. Then we look down to make sure it's totally 90 degrees up, of which it is, and we'll just let that sit and dry like that for a second. Now it's time to really decide on what we're going to paint it, how we're going to paint it, and various bits and pieces like that. We're going to do this in the grey scheme, which is the sort of the modern colours, if you like. So okay, the tail's on there now. Some other little bits we can put on. We can put the box on top, the conditioning box, and the ventral fins that go on the bottom. So obviously minding the tail, we'll get these fins on now. And obviously there is a left and a right. And they're quite a nice fit. So we'll close in like that. 2 rubs of glue. There we'll let those find their own way in. There we go, we'll just check down to make sure we're in the right angles. Okay, we're happy with those, and then we've got to put on the box on the top. So it just fits in like that. There we go. Now we'll just leave this edge up, so we'll balance it there. We'll let those areas dry, and then in the meantime what we can do, we can mask up these front canopies. I've already done a small little video tutorial on canopies, so I won't go through it again, but basically it's just the same thing. Okay, so we've got these clear parts on. Now I used something slightly different here. I'll be talking about this on one of the shows, but this is alligator glue. It's a new type of glue out that I'm aware of. Now the thing is, obviously when you're sticking down canopies, your biggest problem is you don't want any fogging, which when we say fogging we mean sometimes the glue gets underneath and it makes a white sort of paste thing. The one that does that the most is super glue. Now there's ways to beat that type of thing happening, i.e. use by dipping them in future or glossing your parts first, it can't fog to it. But that's why I've always until now used tacky glue. Now the reason I use tacky glue, it's got a bit of a bite to it, it sits in there and away you go. It's quite nice to work with, and you know, it's something I've always used and you sort of trust it. Now I've been tried this stuff, this is the first time I've ever used it. Now the thing is, if you imagine it's like a normal glue that sets rock hard, with PVA you can almost roll it away with your fingernail, it's pliable, it's bendy. This dries actually hard, so you can sand it, and I've used it for all these parts here for the first time. And I can say they're stuck on very well. It's got quite a nice gap filling capability as well. So you can actually cocktail stick, pop it on, and then with a damp cotton bud, like I've showed you in the other ones, you just literally just wipe it off. But there we go. It's called alligator glue. This one has come from A to Z. I'll put the address up. And they stock it here in the UK. Rest of the world, obviously, you have to find your own location. But it's basically a water-based glue which dries completely clear and very, very hard as well. So I'd recommend using that. Okay, so we're all basically in position now. What we're going to do is just use a couple of bits of tack, nice little blobs. What we're going to do is sit them one in there, so the canopies you can push down onto them like so. One there. If you use a good dollop that fills up a bit of your well, two things it'll do. One, it holds it down very firmly, and secondly, it will just bung up any little gaps as you push down on there. So there we go. It's in now, and we're all basically almost ready for painting. Now, as we said, the tails we're not going to put on at the moment. Obviously, we've got things like wheel wells to take care of and that, but we're pretty happy with everything. So what we're going to do now is spray up the canopy area black, so obviously from the inside it looks black, usual way, and then we can actually then give it a coat of primer just to make sure and to have a look at anything that might need some little bit of attention before we move on to actually painting it. Right, as you can see, we've sprayed the black, done a few little areas, had a bit left over just to check joins and seams and things like that, which we're all happy with. They all came out very, very well. We just bring you in a little bit. So obviously, you know, we had that real nasty gap just in here. We've redone the panel line there. Obviously, we've got them to sit quite nicely on the top. Underneath, it was a complete mess, if you remember, so we're all okay there. So there's a few little bits just to go on the bottom, which we can do now. And that's these. We've got the chaff launches at the back and these little bumps underneath here. Now, these are the vents, or would be the vents on the gun. So what we'd do, to make it easier to put them in, we're just going to put a little blob there. And then the venti part, the slitty bit if you like, goes to the rear. And we can just pop that on. And then we can manoeuvre it to exactly how we want it. And then we just put a touch more glue just down each side to make sure we've filled up any gaps. Same on the other side. Bit of a blob. Don't want to go on that one. There we go. We can push it into position. There we go. We're saying the same thing. A little bit around each side. Whoops. Okay. So that's those two on like that. Then we just got to put these to the rear, which go in after the break. There's a little mould mark you can see on each side to give you a clue. Fit one like that. Then one like that. Touch more just round. So let the capillary do all the work to wrap itself around and weld in. That's those two set like that. So then really what we need to do now is we'll let that dry and totally go off. So in the meantime, right, so we've got things on the go. The main part here is drying. I've just resanded just to check a few bits, that's why it's gone grey again. But basically this is just all drying off now, the last little bits and pieces. I've put the inner doors, the ones that are just here, they're in place because they're shut actually as it travels. And as he says that, he's knocked this one, so we just need to reset that one. That's it. Just put a drop of glue on there. Right, so that's that one basically ready for all painting. Now the undercarriage and bits we've got all here. We've taken some off the sprue, some are still on the sprue. what I've taken off is the gear legs, the air brakes at the back, the front main undercarriage doors, the nose wheel ones, both parts, and glued that together, and then the wheels. Now the trouble with the wheels in this particular kit is you've got ejector pin marks, quite nasty ones on there. So there's two ways of doing it. You could fill it or you could sand it. The speed case in this one, we're going to sand it. So what we're going to do is just rub off the little stumps that we've got left from the actual sprue marks. So we get rid of those, and then we're just going to sand off a couple of passes those holes. So obviously what we've done is we've gone down into the plastic a little bit and taken a shave, if you like, out of the tyre. But if we do that and then we give it quite a coarse sanding sponge, oops, like that, and then we do those where we got the sprue joints and give it a rub all the way around. There we go. We're quite easily get away with that. Nobody's ever going to know any difference. So we do that to all of them. The other thing as well, if you take your knife, you'll get like a seam line running down through these parts here, and literally just hold it like that and just run it up, and you'll take a little coil of plastic off, and that actually saves having to get in a file and get in there. The beauty with this is obviously little thin things and delicate things, you just give a gentle rub to get rid of them like that. So we're going to get these parts all cleaned up for the main undercarriage. Now the colour underneath here, commonly known as yuck yellow, for this case I'm going to be using XF4, which is yellow green Tamiya. It's pretty much the same type of colour for that. So we're going to paint up inside the doors, inside the first part of the air brake where the little hole is, and over here in the nose well as well. So we're going to spray those in a moment, and then obviously we're going to spray the inside of the main undercarriage leg doors, which are still on the sprue and on the nose. The actual air brake inside colour is grey, which is the same for the fuselage. Now the undercarriage legs, they're going to be grey as well, and so are the hubs actually on the main wheels themselves. They're going to be grey as well. So what I'm going to do is when I'm spraying the grey, light grey, because it's a two-tone grey, the lighter colour, I'm going to relighten it just a fraction and spray the legs with it as well. So it just, at the same time as we're spraying, we can do that, because we're going to pre-shade this as well, and we're going to pre-lighten after it. We're going to lighten up those panels as well, like we usually do. So I'll get these parts all cleaned up, and then we'll get over to the spray bay. Okay, so time for priming. So obviously we've got a few of the parts here, but we're not going to worry about priming those just yet. The only thing we're going to really concentrate on doing is the main aircraft itself. So as you can see in here, I've just got this on a clamp, sort of spring-loaded thing. Best to go pop round the entire model with a moist cloth and just whip it all round. And what you'll do, you'll pull any of that filler dust that we've been doing or any other bits and pieces off, because you'll find, especially if you're using acrylics, that it will leave marks. So it has to be a damp cloth, otherwise you end up just pushing it around. So just a bit of kitchen roll all over it, just like that. Then take your airbrush, just there. Make sure you're getting all the wheel wells, bits and pieces like that, and it will just blow it out and get rid of any nasties. Okay, we're going to be using XF28 as a primer. As I've said before, use anything you like. It doesn't have to be a particular primer. If you've got a particular primer that you use, that's great. If you use a spray can, whichever you like. Right, this is quite thin anyway, because it's an old one I've got floating around. I've tipped back in the bottle, so it's quite thin anyway. What I'm going to do, I'll start with these here. Now if you've got yourself some spring-loaded clamps like this, they come in extremely handy for holding bits. So if we check our float, nice dusty coat all over. Now if you haven't seen any of the tutorials and this is your first one, I'll just go over the basics of this. Why do we prime? We prime for two reasons. One is we can check any details to make sure it's all okay. Panel lines recessed, you can see how they're going to look when it's got a paint coat on, bits and pieces like that. Second reason why is that the paints, when we spray on there, will have something really nice to grip to. Whereas if you were doing it straight onto the plastic, it might have trouble gripping and getting a bite onto that plastic, especially for what we're going to be doing in a minute, pre-shading straight onto plastic can be a little bit of a hit and miss affair. Because we're using acrylics, I'm cutting back to air just to dry it off. And being acrylic, which means you can do that and you can touch it and just pop it out the way for a moment. Right, just got to get the compressor going, which is right next to the camera, so I'm sorry if it's a bit loud. So what we'll do, we've got our little stand here. We pop those out of the way. There. I'll start on the bottom, but obviously you can start anywhere you like. Just get a bit of pressure in there. Just for the record, we've got a 0.4 pretty much average needle set in the airbrush. This is dual action evolution 2-in-1, and we're running at 30 psi, quite a high psi, because it's just a primer. There we go, spray it on. Remember, it doesn't have to be too neat, as long as it's covering and it's even. That's perfect for primer work. Okay, let's do the top. Things to look for when you're priming like that, just hold on there. Things you're looking for is those joins that we've been doing, and obviously we did a lot of filler work down the bottom here, and we did an awful lot of you know, actual rescribing and sorting things out, especially around this middle area. And as you say, now you can have a look and see how it's actually going to look, and if those panel lines, if it all looks a bit of a mess still, you know, don't be afraid, you can stop, you can go back and have a fiddle and, you know, try and sort it out again. But you see where we've rescribed the bottom here, all those panel lines, it's all really coming to life quite nicely. You know, you wouldn't know that obviously we've stuck tons of filler down in the middle here and so forth. And obviously checking around your canopy where we've put the glue to obviously glue the canopies in, you can see what the join's like, if there's any big gaps or if it looks a bit unsightly. You know, you can let this say, right, okay, we'll hold here, we'll do something about it, we'll get some filler in there, we'll try and, you know, get a bit more PVA and join it up and sort of weld it up and so forth as you go around. But it's just little things like that that will help you out by seeing it now, rather than, you know, later on when you've got a nice coat and you look back and it's all looking nice, all of a sudden all these things start to stand out. So you can look at it right now. Okay, so that's all the priming done. We're going to let that dry for about half an hour now, and then we can get on and do some pre-shading to it and start to bring it to life. Now in the meantime, we've still got other bits and pieces we can be getting on with. We can paint up, if we wanted to, the undercarriage now. You could make a start on any sort of weapons fit if you were doing obviously the single-seater version. This is the two-seat trainer. So all that's going to be having is a pair of fuel tanks like this. But the trouble with these are not very nice at all. I'm going to need a little bit of sanding and filling work. If this is the first one off for you, these are quite horrible tanks to work with for your first attempt, obviously, at making a kit. So you don't really have to use them if you didn't want to. If you wanted to keep it simple, you could do it just like that.